The legend that disappeared. You're standing on the edge of time, staring into the Pacific, where sunlight fades into endless blue. Somewhere beneath those waves sleeps a legend, not just a ship but a heartbeat of history, the USS Hornet, CV-8, one of America's most powerful aircraft carriers of World War II. For decades, her story was reduced to whispers, a name etched in naval records, a rumor carried by the sea. But before she vanished beneath the waves, she changed the course of war itself. The Hornet's beginning wasn't wrapped in ceremony or fame. When she first touched water at Newport News, Virginia, in December 1940, there were no grand speeches or fanfare. The world was already trembling. Europe burned under German blitzkrieg, and the Pacific simmered with tension. Yet, quietly, the U.S. Navy was building its weapons of destiny, and among them, the Hornet, sleek, 800 feet of steel, capable of carrying 2,000 men and dozens of aircraft, was a weapon designed to reach far beyond sight. By October 1941, she was commissioned, officially joining the fleet as CV-8, the newest of the Yorktown-class carriers, sisters to the Yorktown and the Enterprise. The Hornet was a fortress that moved with grace, her engines roaring like a heartbeat under steel decks. But her trial would come faster than anyone imagined. Just months later, the calm of the Pacific shattered. Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. The United States was pulled into a war that spanned oceans, and suddenly every ship, every pilot, every inch of steel mattered. The Hornet's first mission was not just bold, it was impossible. In April 1942, a daring plan formed, one that defied logic and physics. America would strike back at Japan, not from bases, not from nearby islands, but from the sea itself. 16 Army B-25 bombers, aircraft never designed for carrier decks, were loaded onto Hornet's narrow runway. You can almost picture it, crews crammed on deck, wind screaming across steel, bombers lined wingtip to wingtip under the gray dawn. Every man knew the odds. The bombers couldn't land back on the carrier. They would launch, strike Japan, and hope to find airfields in China. As the Hornet sailed toward enemy waters, Admiral Halsey's fleet shielded her like a guardian. And then, on the morning of April 18, 1942, something that had never been done, something that still feels impossible, happened. One by one, those massive B-25 bombers rolled down the deck and leapt into the sky. Engines screamed, wings clawed at the air, the deck shook under their weight. 16 planes disappeared into the horizon, a steel fist thrown across the Pacific. It was the Doolittle Raid, named after Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. The physical damage to Japan was limited, but the psychological impact was devastating. For the first time, Japanese cities felt the war they had started. And for America, reeling from Pearl Harbor, it was hope reborn. The Hornet had delivered that hope. She had struck first and struck deep. But the ocean never gives without taking back. Just weeks later, Hornet joined her sisters, Enterprise and Yorktown, in the Battle of Midway, June 1942. 4 Japanese carriers against 3 American ones. The Pacific became a chessboard of smoke, torpedoes, and courage. From Hornet's deck, dive bombers and torpedo planes clawed into the sky, vanishing into the storm of battle. Hours later, reports crackled over the radio, 4 Japanese carriers destroyed. Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu. The backbone of the Imperial Navy had been broken. You can imagine the relief, the cheers that erupted across the decks, the knowledge that the tide had finally turned. Midway wasn't just a victory, it was a resurrection. The Hornet's pilots had helped cripple an empire. Her name began to carry weight, not just in the Navy, but in every American heart. But the ocean doesn't hand out legends without blood. And Hornet's story was far from over. By the fall of 1942, the war had moved to the Solomon Islands, where American forces were fighting tooth and nail to hold Guadalcanal. The Japanese sent ship after ship, wave after wave, trying to crush the fragile foothold. And in those brutal months, the Hornet became the only operational U.S. carrier in the entire Pacific, alone, outnumbered, and relentless. Her decks became a revolving door of chaos, planes launching and landing around the clock, some trailing smoke, others returning shattered. Her pilots barely slept. Her crew worked through nights lit by red battle lamps, repairing aircraft, patching holes, counting losses. Every takeoff was a risk, every landing a miracle. The ship had become a floating city of exhaustion and courage. But her luck, like all legends, was finite. October 26, 1942, the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. The day the Hornet met her fate, the Japanese came in waves. Dive bombers slicing through the clouds, torpedo planes racing just above the water. The Hornet's guns thundered, filling the sky with steel, but the enemy was relentless. A 550-pound bomb struck her flight deck, tearing through steel and igniting fires. Another hit near the bridge, blasting men and machinery into the air. Torpedoes struck her hull, flooding compartments. The deck trembled, the lights flickered, and the ship groaned like a living thing in pain. Still, the crew fought. They fought through the smoke, through the flames, through the chaos. Damage control teams crawled through flooded decks, sealing bulkheads, dragging the wounded to safety. The Hornet refused to die. For hours, she burned but stayed afloat, a ghost surrounded by fire. But the damage was too deep. Engines dead, steering gone, ammunition cooking off in the heat. Captain Charles P. Mason finally gave the order no sailor ever wants to hear: abandon ship. One by one, men leapt into oil-slicked water as explosions echoed behind them. Destroyers closed in to scuttle her, to sink their own carrier before the Japanese could capture it. They fired torpedoes. The Hornet took them all, and still she wouldn't go down. Her hull refused the sea, as if pride itself held her up. It wasn't until the next morning, when Japanese destroyers found her drifting, that they delivered the final blows. Only then did the Hornet sink, slowly, defiantly, disappearing beneath the waves. Her career had lasted only 16 months. But in that short time, she had launched the Doolittle Raid, fought at Midway, defended Guadalcanal, and finally gone down in flames. 4 battle stars, a record of valor carved into history. You can almost picture her now, silent, sinking through the cold blue darkness, the fires dimming, the noise fading, the ocean closing over her decks, and then silence. A silence that lasted 70 years. But legends don't die in silence, they wait. Because the Hornet didn't just vanish. She called to those who remembered, to sailors, historians, and dreamers who couldn't accept that she was gone. Somewhere down there, beneath miles of black water, she was still there. Engines rusted, decks collapsed, her name buried under silt. But her story wasn't over. The Pacific doesn't forget, it only hides. And when technology caught up, when man built machines that could see where no diver could ever go, the Hornet's voice would rise again. The question was never if she would be found. It was when. Because some ships don't rest. They wait to be seen again. The search, how they looked, you're about to descend into the kind of mystery that swallows decades. For 70 years, the USS Hornet slept somewhere in the endless Pacific, her position lost, her final moments scattered across memories, reports, and stormy coordinates. Generations of sailors passed, wars came and went, and still no one could say where the Hornet lay. To many she was gone forever. To others, she was unfinished business, a riddle waiting to be solved by those bold enough to chase ghosts through the deep. The story of her rediscovery didn't begin at sea. It began in silence, in archives, libraries, and the forgotten corners of history. A team of explorers led by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, took on the mission not for treasure or fame, but for truth. Allen's passion wasn't for gold. It was for the lost machines that had shaped the modern world. His company, Vulcan Inc., had already found other giants of history: the battleship Musashi, the cruiser Indianapolis, the carrier Lexington. But one name still haunted the maps: the Hornet. No one knew exactly where she was. The official Navy records listed a rough area, somewhere east of the Solomon Islands. But the Pacific is vast beyond comprehension. It's not an ocean, it's a universe. And within that black expanse, a single shipwreck might as well be a grain of sand in a storm. Still, the team believed she could be found. If they listened to history closely enough, they started on land, inside musty Navy records and war diaries. They scoured after action reports, survivor testimonies, and ship logs from the 9 American and Japanese vessels that had witnessed the Hornet's final battle at Santa Cruz. Every ship had recorded something different: bearings, compass readings, radar blips, and frantic radio calls. Alone, each record was a fragment. Together, they were chaos. But slowly, line by line, they began to overlap, like assembling a shattered mirror. You can imagine the scene: researchers sitting under dim lights, old pages spread across tables, notes scribbled in pencil, maps covered in circles and arrows. The coordinates didn't match perfectly. No two reports ever do in war. Some were off by miles, some by entire degrees. But patterns began to emerge. A course plotted here, a drift accounted for there. They layered every bit of data onto digital maps, adjusting for currents, storm movement, and the ship's likely rate of descent. It wasn't archaeology, it was detective work. Months passed. The Hornet's last known location began to take shape, a rough square of ocean a few hundred miles wide. The team refined it further, calculating the drift caused by wind, torpedo strikes, and sinking velocity. They called these regions probability zones. Still, it was a gamble. The Pacific has no mercy for human certainty. One wrong estimate and you could search for decades and find nothing. That's when the technology took over. The research vessel RV Petrel, operated by Vulcan, was not an ordinary ship. It was a floating laboratory, a marvel of science equipped to see through darkness. On board were tools designed to hunt ghosts, multi-beam sonar arrays that mapped the seafloor in razor-sharp detail, autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs that could dive deeper than light itself, and remotely operated vehicles, ROVs. Robotic explorers armed with cameras, sensors, and manipulator arms, each capable of surviving where no human could. The crew worked in shifts, their eyes locked on screens filled with blue static and sonar waves. Every faint bump on the seafloor was examined, every shadow double-checked. The ocean floor here was uneven, scarred by mountains, ridges, and trenches that could easily swallow a ship whole. Even the smallest error in calculation meant days wasted, fuel burned, data lost. And then, one night, after months of scanning, the sonar lit up. A shape appeared on the screen. It was faint, but unmistakable, a long, symmetrical outline, far too straight, far too structured to be natural. One of the operators leaned forward. "We've got something." The room fell silent. Technicians measured the dimensions. Over 800 feet long, with the faint impression of a flat deck and angular structures rising from the center. The Hornet was 809 feet long. Could it be? The sonar pinged again. This time, the image sharpened, showing a massive rectangular shadow resting at a slope surrounded by debris fields. It was there, exactly where probability had whispered she might be. After 77 years of darkness, the USS Hornet had returned to the world of the living, not in body, but in memory. But in exploration, discovery is never instant. Finding is one thing, proving is another. The next step was confirmation, and it required courage. The sea here was 17,500 feet deep, nearly 3.3 miles straight down. At that depth, sunlight doesn't exist. The water pressure could crush a steel hull like paper. Every wire, every seal, every circuit on the ROV had to work perfectly. If anything failed, it would be lost forever. The crew prepared through the night. They checked the cables, calibrated the thrusters, and sealed the cameras against the cold. Every mission at that depth was a conversation with the unknown. When the ROV finally slipped below the waves, the room above went quiet. Just the soft hum of machines and the faint blip of tracking sonar filling the air. You're watching through their eyes now as the ROV sinks through layer after layer of darkness. At 1,000 feet, the light fades. At 5,000 feet, there's only black. At 10,000 feet, the temperature drops near freezing. At 15,000 feet, the water becomes a crushing weight. And then, the cameras catch something. The beam of light sweeps across the seafloor, and there it is. Metal, structure, a deck rising from the sand, scarred but intact. The ROV hovers closer. you see railings, ripped plating, a turret half buried but still upright. The shape is too perfect, too deliberate, too human. This wasn't just wreckage, it was architecture. The ship hadn't disappeared, it had descended. The footage played in silence as the crew above watched. They were staring at the ghost of a war that had once set the world on fire. Each minute brought more evidence. Catapult tracks, elevator shafts, gun mounts, even the faint remnants of the bridge. The operators compared every shot with blueprints from 1942. Every detail matched. The angle of the bow, the spacing between guns, the distinctive pattern of the flight deck plating. It was like the ship herself was whispering, "Yes, it's me." But the team still needed one more sign, one symbol beyond doubt. They searched along the hull, clearing the sediment with the ROV's thrusters. The cameras panned slowly, carefully. And then, through the haze of silt and time, something appeared, a number etched into the steel. A single 8. That was it. The room erupted. 77 years after her death, the USS Hornet had been found. But the celebration was quiet. There were no cheers, no shouts. Only stillness, a kind of reverence, because they all knew what they were looking at wasn't just metal. It was memory, a war grave, a time capsule, a monument that had waited almost a century to be seen again. You can almost feel the weight of that moment, the realization that technology had not just found a ship, but reached through time itself. The ROV drifted closer, and the cameras began to map her in full. The flight deck stretched into the dark, littered with fragments of her story, broken wings, shell casings, cables still coiled where they'd been left. The ocean had preserved her not as a ruin, but as a snapshot, the moment the Hornet fell frozen in time. For the crew aboard the Petrel, it was more than discovery. It was resurrection, a story written in salt and silence, now illuminated by light for the first time in living memory. They had brought a ghost back from the abyss, and now they had to face what she had kept hidden, what they would soon find. The guns still pointing skyward, the aircraft resting untouched, the personal relics of sailors who never came home, would turn discovery into revelation, because what lay beneath wasn't just a wreck. It was a message from the past, preserved, waiting, and still hauntingly alive. What shocked everyone? The artifact. You're watching the cameras descend deeper, past the last flickers of sunlight, into the eternal night of the ocean. The world here feels different. The silence is heavier. Even sound seems to move slower, swallowed by cold black water that hasn't seen light since the Hornet fell. Then, suddenly, something appears. The ROV's lights cut through the void and paint a ghostly shape, the outline of a ship frozen in time. The cameras tilt, adjust focus, and your heart skips, because this is no pile of debris. This is order, geometry, structure. And then, through the haze of drifting silt, you see her, the USS Hornet. She lies at a steep angle, her bow tilted upward as if still trying to reach the surface. The deck is coated in a fine layer of sediment, but her lines, the ones drawn by engineers and burned into blueprints 80 years ago, are still there. Sharp, defiant. Her name may be gone from the hull, but the shape itself tells you everything. The first thing the explorers notice is the 5-inch gun turret near the bow. Its barrel still points upward, aimed toward a surface it would never see again. The gun hasn't fallen. It hasn't rusted into collapse. It stands like a sentinel, silent but proud, a machine still performing its duty long after the men who manned it are gone. The steel barrel glimmers under the ROV's floodlights, the same steel that once roared fire into the skies of the Pacific. It's not just a weapon anymore. It's a memory frozen in steel. As the ROV glides forward, the cameras sweep across the flight deck. What they reveal next silences the entire control room. The anti-aircraft batteries, the 1.1-inch quad mounts, are still locked in position, their barrels trained toward an invisible enemy above. The mounts, the recoil springs, even the protective shields remain aligned, untouched. They look ready, ready to defend, ready to fire. For a moment, it feels as if the crew had simply stepped away, like time had paused mid-battle and never resumed. The ocean hadn't scattered them, it had preserved them. Perfectly. Each piece sits where it was left on that October day in 1942 when chaos and fire tore across the deck. The ROV continues its slow glide, its lights dancing across the steel. And then, through the haze, something smaller appears, something that doesn't belong to war. A vehicle, squat, boxy, unmistakably human. It's an International Harvester aircraft tug used to tow bombers across the deck. It sits upright, square, and perfectly balanced, as if waiting for another order to move a plane into position. Its steering wheel is intact. Its tires are still visible beneath layers of silt. The tiny machine looks asleep, not destroyed. It's a relic of routine, of daily work, of ordinary life aboard a ship built for extraordinary missions. You can almost see the deckhands shouting over engines, the smell of oil and salt, the heat rising from sun-baked steel. But here, in this grave of silence, that noise is gone. The tug stands as a monument to the quiet that follows battle. The cameras move farther down the deck, and then the entire room gasps, because lying ahead, folded neatly, its wings tucked in, is a Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighter, an aircraft, intact. Its fuselage still gleams faintly under the ROV's lights. The insignia is faint but visible, the star of the United States Navy. Its wings are folded tight against its body, just like it would have been on the carrier's deck moments before launch. The plane hasn't shattered. It hasn't broken apart. It sits patiently as though its pilot might climb aboard at any second. That image, a fighter plane waiting for orders on a sunken deck, becomes one of the most haunting moments in underwater exploration. Even the hardened explorers fall silent. You're looking not just at history, but at life frozen mid-breath, a weapon of war preserved like a photograph that refuses to fade. And then, the cameras find something even more intimate. A jacket, half buried in sediment, hanging from what used to be a hatchway. Its fabric sways slightly in the current, still holding its shape. Not far from it, a wash kit. A simple toiletry bag lies open, with a toothbrush still inside. They aren't military artifacts. They're human ones. Each item belonged to a sailor who once called this ship home. Someone who laughed, who wrote letters, who worried about the next mission, someone who may not have made it off the ship. The researchers watching this footage don't speak. Some remove their headsets. Others simply stare, because in those tiny, ordinary objects lies the true weight of the discovery. These were not just soldiers, they were men. And the ocean, in its strange mercy, kept their stories safe. The ROV continues downward, tracing the broken catapults, the twisted railing, and the shattered remnants of the island, the Hornet's control tower. Even now, parts of it still rise defiantly. The command bridge, though fractured, stands like a monument of resolve. Then, under the beam of light, a final detail emerges, faint, almost erased by time, but still there, a number welded into the hull 8, the Hornet's designation, CV-8. Carved into steel that has outlasted generations. That single number confirms what everyone already knows in their hearts. You're not just looking at a shipwreck. You're looking at the USS Hornet herself. The footage moves across the rest of the hull, revealing patterns that match blueprints exactly. Every catapult track, every hatch, every railing is where it should be. The structure is bruised, battered, but recognizable. A testament to how well she was built and how fiercely she fought. It becomes clear the Hornet didn't die in chaos. She descended with dignity. The damage isn't random. It's surgical, consistent with the bombs and torpedoes recorded in battle reports. The deck is torn where a 550-pound bomb struck. The hull caves inward near the midsection where torpedoes hit. The island leans slightly, torn from the base, but still standing. It's not destruction. It's memory cast in iron. Every scar tells a story. Every broken beam is a sentence in the last chapter of her life. The deeper the cameras go, the more surreal it becomes. The ocean floor has not devoured her. Instead, it's guarded her. The water here is near freezing. The absence of sunlight, the slow, moving currents. All these factors work together like nature's vault. Even after 70 years, paint lingers on her sides. Markings remain readable. The Hornet hasn't decayed. She's been preserved. The lead researcher calls it a time capsule of courage, because that's what she is. A vessel that carried not only aircraft but human determination, human pain, and human hope. As the footage continues, the ROV's lights fall upon the ship's deck edge, revealing ropes, scattered tools, and ammunition shells half buried in the sand. Each object becomes more than metal. It's a relic of the men who once stood there. A wrench, a helmet, a single rusted mug, all silent now. But together they whisper of long days and longer nights, of fear, duty, and camaraderie. It's then that you realize this isn't just a military discovery, it's a human one. The explorers don't cheer when they confirm the ship's identity. They lower their voices. The Petrel's crew stands quietly before the monitor, hats off, the glow of the screens flickering across their faces. Because what they're witnessing isn't a victory. It's a memorial. Every frame of the video becomes a portal to the past. Every flicker of light across that steel deck becomes a heartbeat. And as the ROV backs away, the Hornet fades into the darkness once more, her outline vanishing beneath drifting clouds of sediment, returning to her sleep, as if satisfied that the world finally remembered her. What she revealed in those few hours was more than history could ever record. She had waited nearly 8 decades to show the world her face again. And now that she had, the question changed. From where she was to what else she still kept hidden. Because the Hornet hadn't just been found. She had been awakened. The legacy beneath the waves. You're staring at a ship that refused to vanish. A war machine once built for destruction, now resting in perfect silence beneath miles of water. And yet, even in death, the USS Hornet speaks. Not in words, but in echoes that ripple through time. Her discovery wasn't just a technological triumph. It was a resurrection. A reunion between the present and a past that still breathes beneath the Pacific. When the first images of the Hornet's wreck appeared on screens aboard the RV Petrel, the room went silent. No one spoke. The explorers weren't looking at broken metal. They were looking at a ghost preserved with impossible precision. Her guns, her aircraft, even the smallest tools still lay exactly where her crew had left them. For 77 years, the ocean had held her close, refusing to let the world forget. What you see on that seafloor isn't decay, it's defiance. The Hornet still carries herself like a ship ready for battle. Her deck wide and scarred, her island tilted but standing, her turrets aimed upward as though still guarding the horizon. The pressure of 17,000 feet has tried to crush her, the salt has tried to corrode her, but she endures.